Okay, yeah.
Welcome back, everybody. This is episode 5 with Dr. Lucy Barbera, and this is about I figli della ruota, the foundings, the Befrotrofi era of the Bourbon era in Sicily of the children, the orphan children. So welcome back. Thank you, Dr. Lucy, for your time.
Thank you.
Oh, look at me. You can tell it's a pandemic. Look at my hair.
COVID.
You're beautiful.
COVID hair.
Always. It doesn't matter.
COVID hair. Yep, COVID hair.
Okay, so we were talking about the wet nurses who had in care these children. And you know, many of them were from the countryside, and they were, you know, willing to do that because it was a way for them to earn money, to have an income.
How were those supposed to feed their children? That was the only way, any source of income. That's probably why they were having that many children, and feeding that many children could feed more. I mean, my nonna, she had a child, and her sister-in-law had a child at the same time, but my nonna couldn't feed and couldn't give my father milk, so my auntie fed my father and his cousin at the same time in those days.
But back then, these children were called figli di latte. Erano figli di latte. Between, you know, the children, they called themselves fratelli di latte.
Yeah.
It was a very also popular phenomenon to help each other to breastfeed the children in case there was, you know, someone who had no milk to feed their children.
And I remember that you were telling me a couple of weeks ago about the, what was that thing where the goes into the noble homes and that child would cook or do things in the house?
La curata.
La curata. So that was what there was for those children too in those times, the economic times. They would have to go into the noble people's homes, and they would be used for whatever they need. Yeah, as a servant.
And serve, and then be sexually exploited, and then it was like the chain, you know?
Oh,
anyway.
But that was slavery.
Yeah, it was slavery back then, but it was, you know, legitimate in a way, you know?
Yeah.
Anyway, let's
go.
move on.
There's more to tell.
Let's move on. So we had 2 types of wet nurses. Mostly they were women from the countryside, and they can earn an income. So some of them, to have more money, to earn more money, prefer to be wet nurses inside these hospitals. So they went to live completely there. They could leave, for example, their husbands to stay for a certain period to breastfeed these foundlings in the hospitals. All right? Yeah. Then we had the outside wet nurses, and these ones, you know, had in foster care with their family, their husband, these kids. What happened then that, for example, for the law in the Kingdom of Sicily, according to this law back then from the 1760, in foster care with these wet nurses, the boys could be until they were 5 years old, while the girls could stay in foster care until 7-year-old. And this was, you know, the law back then. But after, the law established that the age for foster care was higher. Anyway, what happened if the wet nurses and their family didn't keep these children? They gave back to the Brefotrofio these kids. If they were adopted anyway, the boys had the prevalence. From my research, I can tell you that mainly the girls were given back after there was no way to earn money from, you know, the foster care for the girls. And the reason why they kept and adopted boys rather than girls is because in the farm, the boys could be workforce.
Okay, hang on a minute.
I wondered about that. I wondered about the mortality rate of girls versus boys, and whether because a male is able to work and because a male is able to produce, whether there was any preferences and more special attention on the males rather than the girls. I wondered about that. Do you have any more details about that, Dr. Lucia? I'm just curious.
I can tell you that the girls were like a kind of burden in a way because of the dowry. You know, the girls to be married, you had to provide them with the dowry. So
once again, being born, you know, your gender being a female, you're already at the back foot.
Yes. Yeah. So what happened that if the girls were not adopted, they were entrusted to the bishops, or they grew up then in the brefotrofio, becoming like nurses, helping for other foundlings. I could find many histories of these girls who then grew up in the hospitals, and they, you know, helped for looking after these children who were foundlings like they were. And what happened that, for example, for girls, there were kind of special orphanages called conservatori, and the church was in a way looking after these kind of orphanages for the girls.
That's why, is it because that's why in that era there was a lot of nuns?
Even that, yeah. And these conservatori were called the conservatori because it was like a kind of preserve the honor of these girls. Conservare. That's why we call these orphanages conservatori.
Yeah. Sorry to interrupt again. You know what it reminds me of in some sort of degree, although it's a little bit more modern times, and that is The Handmaid's Tale. If you've watched The Handmaid's Tale, it's more about the woman being a producer of children, and no husband or wife to have any intimacy. The only reason you have intimacy is to produce children, and then having selective gender birth rate mortality, or to look after the males rather than the females, and the females are then put into you know, little compounds where they're selected based on how they produce children. So if they're they have all these tests. If their fertility rate is high, they're able to be assigned to a noble family, only for the purpose of being the handmaid's tale and to produce children. So that story about futuristic, it's really going back in time. But the other thing that I'm really curious of, and working in the you know, in the disability sector and the aged care sector, and there's a lot of Italian families that married cousins, cugini, and because of they've married into, you know, with their cousins, they have a lot of congenital defects. So I'm curious if that practice was happening where you've got cousins marrying cousins, or family members, uncles marrying nieces, only for the purpose of deriving an income to be sustainable, rather than for love or for anything else. So your main role is to marry your zio or marry your cugino so that you can have a child, and then you become a wet nurse, because, you know, the more fertile you are, the more you can provide an income and, you know, keep a family growing, because that wouldn't have been just for one family, that income, that would have been for a whole generation of families. So I'm wondering if that happened during that particular time.
Of course. Now, my uncle who lived in the Aeolian Islands told me, Lucia, Aeolian Islands were so full of foundlings because they were born between relationships there were with cousins, brother, mother, you know, in these tiny islands, for example. And my uncle told me, Lucia, here was huge, huge. They found so many bones of babies near the convent of Lipari because it was huge. Because of this relationship between, cousins, brother, sister. In these tiny villages back then, there was no television,
And no birth control.
no birth control, that's right. It was huge. Yeah.
All I can say is praise God for where we live in now.
Yeah.
It's like your body was a temple, a furnace just for reproduction.
Yeah, that's it. Housekeeper. These girls, in fact, in these orphanages, were educated to become good housekeepers and to learn how to sew. And this, it was very important for them because they could then build up a dowry for the marriage or for the convent. So sometimes, what happened, I found in the documents that when there were boys, for example, normal boys, who could not find a woman in the village, they knew for sure that if they went to these orphanages, they could find a good girl, a good housekeeper with a dowry. So they were looking even to go and have as a woman one of the foundlings, because for sure they were supported by the church and the public. They had a kind of dowry instead of nothing.
Yeah.
So there was even this. And boy were kept mainly by the farmers because they were good workforce in the farm. When they were given back to the Brefotrofio, they went and educated in orphanages. And I can tell you that in Sicily, there were 3 royal charity hospices, Palermo, Messina, and here the life was very hard. And the kids here learned how to tailor, how to become good show makers, printing, having a knowledge of music. They were also educated to learn a musical instrument. And in Messina, they were mainly educated to become people who were able to print. Ci sono tante tipografie in Messina. And in these orphanages, these kids were educated anyway to have a kind of a mestiere, a profession for them to earn money as an adult. Anyway,
it's interesting how culture and music is a big part of that for them. Like they put music as being, that's just one that's left of center, isn't it? So because because Sicilians are so powerful when it comes to literature and poetry and music and the arts. So I'm wondering whether it became a noble craft to know that, and perhaps that's what was fostered during that time, because we do have a lot of shoemakers. I know in Provincia Catania, for example, there's a lot of shoemakers and a lot of milliners and a lot of ladies that were able to sew. So it's really interesting how they added the culture and the arts to that craft, because we're so versed and so passionate through our arts and our literature that it got for them to, I don't know, whether it was used for them to spread their story or to share their story. I don't know. I just thought of that. I have no idea. Non lo so perché ho pensato quello, ma io penso di questo.
Ma se ti viene in mente vuol dire che sì, può essere che era così. Yeah. Avete domande?
No,
Carmela, che pensi?
So vedi che è Manazzo, abolition in Messina. So dimmi la storia, se io cresco e mi faccio un'età maggiore e io voglio sapere chi sono i miei genitori.
Sì. Allora, se non ci sono, se non hai niente in mano, puoi andare a chiedere al Tribunale per i minorenni come discendente, no? che vuole sapere delle proprie origini, oppure puoi andare al brefotrofio di Messina e se hai informazioni sulla data di nascita, puoi vedere se c'è qualche informazione che riguarda questa bambina, chi è stata data, e poi ricostruire le informazioni anche in base al paesino dove si è trovata questa bambina o questo bambino, capito?
It
Cioè
also,
tutto un ricostruire pezzi di un puzzle.
see, because it could also be if I get a certain age, if I was one of the children and say I got to 10 years old where I could work for my parents that gave me to the wheel and they knew who I was, they'd probably been seeing me, I was maybe in the same town, they would probably come and get me to help them work back.
How would they know that it was you unless you looked the same?
So where are we?
Only if you look the same or you have those characteristics that they would know it was you, unless you had that special ornament that they had the half size of, because you could have your name changed and you might not necessarily be born in the town that your parents or your mother.
And it depends, because there are stories I've read from the lady of the wheel, the one with Ange Coniglio that he wrote. And he writes about that the mother gave the baby up. She gave birth to the child that day. The husband was in the sulfur mines with the rest of the family. She went, imagine giving birth, she went, and then she went to the church, gave the baby in, went back home. The husband knew that she was in labor. She told him that the baby had died. And she sort of knew, but she left the baby like a symbol. I think she left a piece of l'uncinetto, like a little bit of embroidery.
Like this, look, I show you. Look at this image. For sure it was in here, this, look.
Yeah. She left the l'uncinetto, and then she would see that baby was growing. She didn't know, but the baby had green eyes like her, but her husband didn't know nothing. So years happened, and I think that this young girl became the lady of the wheel. She got to about 14, and her mother went to the local council and said, I want to know if this girl is my daughter. I left that with that daughter. And the councillor said, yes, she is your daughter. She went and got this young girl, took her back home with her, told her she was her mother, and she helped her with the family in the farm. And then she ended up going, when the call was to America, she had her surname was Esposito, and she ended up getting her name got changed. She got married and she went and lived in America.
Wow. Yeah, it was a common story with the
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I'm just lost for words.
Yeah.
I'm just
no, keep going, Dr. Lucy, keep going.
Just to let you know that there was a moment where in Italy, everywhere, they decided to close these wheels because there was an abuse by the people. You know, people abuse this kind of system.
So when was it closed? When did they close it?
So what happened that, for example, in Italy, gradually there was the closure, but in Sicily, the closure was later on. So we were the region where we kept for a longer time compared to the rest of Italy, the wheels. So in Messina, for example, in Ferrara, we had the abolition of the ruota in 1867. So abolition in Messina, 1st of February, for what I could find in 1905, but not in other parts of the province, for example, Barcellona and Milazzo. They kept the wheels.
Well, my nonna was born in July 1911. And
so it can be possible that you know, at that time, it depends on the village.
I'm thinking about this era, right? This was the time when the Dante came with the Italian language, changing the course also of history with creating the Italian language as well. So there was so much going on.
Yeah, that was in the 14th century, but anyway, the dialect then spread in terms of abolition, then with Mussolini col fascismo, they completely decided, no, we close these wheels, and if someone wants to abandon a baby, should just come to the office and just present. That's why midwives then were the people who often went to abandon the kids of other people. And we can find, you know, in the records also the name of the midwives, so it can be also another signal to find something related to our ancestors. So, final consideration, despite the wheel close, but nowadays there is a kind of new movement for life, which is now considering, and it's now in place, to have modern foundling wheels. They are spread in Italy and they are spreading around Europe, and also Australia has been discussing to have these modern foundling wheels. Even in Australia, after in November 2014, where 2 babies were found abandoned in New South Wales. One was found abandoned in down a drain, a storm drain, and was found by 2 cyclists. Do you remember that?
Yes, I do.
2014. And then, incredibly, after 1 week, some kids found another abandoned baby, but dead in the beach of New South Wales. I don't know, I don't remember where. But because of these situations, even recently happened in Australia, there has been also the discussion to create modern foundling wheels called the baby hatches. And as you can see in Italy, they are now spreading, and they are called culle per la vita, or baby boxes. And in Europe and also in the poor countries, they are becoming popular as well. Like, for example, in China and Indonesia, there are these kind of modern wheels, I would say. So as you can see, la storia ritorna, you know, history comes back. And the baby boxes in the new version consist of a door or flap in an outside wall, which opens on the soft bed, as you can see here, heated, and the modern wheel is equipped with heat sensors, which alert doctors and nurses to a new arrival. And people can bring babies, usually newborn, and leave them so anonymously in a safe place. So this is the modern version of the wheel. And there was a politician in Australia discussing about the need, maybe because of what happened in 2014, also to have this kind of modern wheels in Australia too. And that's it. Here there is the reference of the permanent now exhibitions I was a part of. I was the scientific coordinator.
Is this the book you were talking about, Dr. Lucy?
The book is here. So this is my book, the publication of my research. It's in Italian. In the future, I hope to be able to translate in English, but this is the history of Sicily related to foundlings and the history of the foundling hospital of Messina.
So this is Dr. Lucy's email address, if anyone wants to email.
That's my email address.
Yeah.
If you, for example, want to know where the Brefotrofio is, where there is an archive, to see if you can relate it to any ancestor of yours. That can be the right place to look for information. For example,
I wonder, Lucia, if I may interrupt.
No, don't worry.
I don't know where this is coming from, but I've got a need to say it. And I wonder if we can research my nonno and find out, because my nonno didn't have any, any item that he's got half of. All I know is I know who his wet nurse was, because I know the name of the wet nurse, the surname of the wet nurse. I know his name. I know he was an orphan. I know a little bit about his mother and father, but that's all I know about my nonno.
From the certificate of birth, we can find information who went to declare this newborn baby,
Do you know what his name was,
to start
Lina?
from there.
I know the wet nurse. The wet nurse was Modica. The surname was Modica, the wet nurse in Ligudia Orbea. His name is Giuseppe Mazzola. His mother's name's Rosa Mazzola.
Was that his real name, or was it just his?
No, that's his adopted name. I don't know what his birth name was. All I know is that's all I know about him. I know nothing about my nonno apart from after he was married to my nonno in story.
That's why what you can do is just refer to the council and find the certificate of birth. And for example, if Mazzola was the last name, he was given as an adopted baby, you can find what was the name before. And by finding what was the name before, then you can find the real certificate of birth. Everything is recorded there, and maybe you can find.
I might want to look at that. My cousin actually works in mio cugino, Pippo Ripa, works at the Comune di Militello in Valle Catania. So I might get him to get in contact with Militello, with the Ligudia Comune, and find out if I know about I want to know. I'd like to know.
Yeah, some people don't know. For example, I really care of saying this. Some people maybe don't know that until 1955, in the Italian identity cards, people had the identification of NN if they were children of unknown parents. So, for example, if, in our family, we know that our family members who came here to Australia, and we found their documents, and in their identity cards, it was up to 1955 there was the name of the person, the last name, the reference of the father, because it was important to declare the paternity, So if, for example, it was me who came here to Australia in the 50s, in my identity card, you could find Barbera, my last name, Lucia, my name, and then the name of my father, Paolo. But if my father was dead, we can find in the identity cards Barbera, Lucia, fu Paolo, So she was the child of Paolo before. But if there was, for example, if I was a foundling, an Italian foundling, in my identity card, for sure there was Barbera Lucia, and then DNN. NN, as I told you at the beginning, nomination, I don't know the name, so of unknown parents. And that was a kind of stigma for everyone. Then the law, thanks to a woman, a politician, Lina Merlin, in Italy, they decided, no, we need to abolish this social stigma, which, recognize this status of foundling for people. But, we can see maybe in some documents of our parents, grandparents,
Lina,
ancestors,
we've got about 5 minutes left.
Yeah.
You want to spend these 5 minutes?
Thank you for your attention. Thank you for inviting me. These are the kids. of the Brefodrofio de Messina with the people looking after them in the 50s. This is a picture of the last place of the Brefodrofio de Messina, and this is the kids.
What era
and,
was it? The 60s, you said?
In the 50s. Yes.
So, Lina, do you want to do another episode and we just talk about your grandpa?
Yeah, I want to do that.
All right, let's finish this one and then we'll go to the next one.
For inviting me. It was a pleasure to share.
Oh, thank you.
No, non andare ancora devo stare parlare mio padre.
Yeah, we're going to talk. We're going to talk for probably another 20 minutes or so, and we'll go and do an episode, and we'll do that, and we'll talk about Lina's nonno. Thank you, everybody, for listening.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you,
very much.
Amore.
Episode.
Ciao, grazie.